as I'm watching this video and knowing I'm going to talk to you, I'm wondering, how did you land a position on the Warren Commission? And basically, you were an investigator.
Well, there were about 15 of us who were assistant counsel. So yes, I was an investigator, but I had the FBI and all the federal agencies. I had everybody in the country who wanted to investigate at my disposal.
Wow. So, but how did you get appointed? I mean, that's
you know, I went to the right cocktail party. I had an acquaintance in Cleveland who I'd met at a cocktail party, and he went to Washington and was working at the time the president was assassinated. He was working for Attorney General Robert Kennedy, and he was one of the people who was asked to identify people. We wanted diversity in those days. Diversity meant geographic diversity. We were all male and all white. But so he knew me. I was from Cleveland, and they wanted somebody from the Midwest at a certain age level and who had certain experience. And I had been an assistant U.S. attorney in Cleveland, handling criminal cases, and I was the only person in the country who knew like that. So I happened to know somebody who was in the right place at the right time. I gave them a resume, and there were things on my resume, I guess, that they liked. So they hired me.
You know, and you're right about the cocktail party. It's sometimes things happen like that. What did it feel like, though, when you wound up, I'm going to be helping investigate the assassination of the President of the United States? You're a fairly young man at the time.
Right, I was 32 years old.
Task. You were how old?
Well, I mean, we knew this would be with us for the rest of our lives. We knew it had tremendous importance for national security because we had to get the right person, and if he was involved in we had to get the right person as the shooter, and if the shooter was involved in a conspiracy, you know, the country's safety depended upon it. So we were determined to find that.
Just had to be. And you said you were what, 34 at the time?
32.
32. Wow.
Well, let me say, no, excuse me. I was 31 at the time, and I was 32 by the time our work ended. But no, I was 31.
That had to be kind of an odd sense that, oh my God, I'm going to investigate.
Right. No, absolutely. You've said it exactly right. I mean, I knew it was probably the combination of the most interesting and most important things I would ever do in my life.
Outside of raising your family.
Exactly.
Outside.
Exactly.
More important. So, well, what was it like? What was the atmosphere of did you work together with all the other councils, or
absolutely
independently?
We were all on the same floor in very small interconnected rooms. In fact, my partner and I shared an office. It isn't like the 21st century. I mean, we didn't have lots of space and so forth. We were in the VFW building, which still exists in DC. They'd rented space for us, and we were all on the same floor with interconnected rooms, and we were in and out of each other's room all the time, and, you know, talking about various components of this that we were getting information on.
I found this, I found that. Did you see this? Did you see that? That kind of thing.
Sure.
Did you all get along?
Very much so. We didn't know each other. And this interesting thing, compared to today, my closest friend at that time among the staff was someone that if we were in the Congress or the state legislature together, we wouldn't agree on anything. He as I've said to people, he was a libertarian before anybody ever heard of libertarians. And he was from North Dakota, farm boy, and but he and I, although we had nothing political that we could, I'm sure, ever agree on, we were working on the same project, and we wanted to find out who did what. And he was very insightful, very bright, and that's the basis on which we worked together.
How much interaction did you have with the actual commission?
Very little. In fact, what people don't understand is that all the work was done by those of us who were the assistant counsel. Everything, virtually every word that's in the Warren Commission report was what we wrote.
Yeah. So the little guys did all the work, the big guys got all the credit. Sort of like,
And they got the blame.
they did get the blame too, but
Yeah.
a lot of people didn't think they got it right. I got to ask. I was at 2 news conferences with Gerald Ford. The first one was right after the hostages were grabbed in Iran, and the second time, ironically, was the day after they were released in Iran. Both times, I wanted to ask him about the Warren Commission. And it just, everybody wanted to talk about Iran, and that was really the most important subject to talk about. But I always wanted to know after, this was, 20 years later.
Sure.
And I wanted to know how he felt about the commission's conclusions. And I never got to ask him. I always regretted that. So, but you, from the movie, still agree with the commission's, or with what you found as investigators?
Yeah, I am frankly more certain that we got it right than I was when we left. I was very much aware, as were a number of the rest of us, that there might be things that we had not been able to uncover. And to put it in more personal terms, we were always aware that there might be some irate girlfriend who would rat on a conspirator. There might be some guy who got arrested and charged with some other crime who wanted to save himself by putting the finger on somebody else. And that, of course, has not happened. And indeed, we've found more information that confirms my feeling that we got the right. I never had any question that whether we got the right guy with Oswald. That was never a question with me. Well, it was at the beginning, but by the time we finished, I had no question that Oswald was the shooter. The question was, did we know enough about Oswald to really preclude the likelihood that there was somebody else that he was involved with? And I was, as I said, always prepared for somebody to come forward and tell us something that we didn't know. What has made me more certain is not only the fact that no one has come forward, but the fact that we now know that 10 days before he shot the president, he had actually gone into the FBI office to threaten an FBI agent. And you're nodding your head, so you obviously know what I'm talking about.
Oh, the movie, yeah.
The Hosty note. And it seems to me that no one who at that time was planning to assassinate the president would go in and expose himself to the FBI. And so that if there was a conspiracy, it had to have been put together sometime after the Hosty note was left. And then when we look at Oswald's life during that period, we have a much better idea now of what was happening to him. And some of it, incidentally, comes from research that has been done by other people.
Yeah, you made a comment in the movie about his relationship with Marina, his wife.
Yeah.
And they were separated. It looked like she might divorce him or leave him. And you made a statement in the movie that intrigued me about he had a different relationship with her at that point in time, maybe he wouldn't have killed the president.
Yeah, it's possible. And I think in order to understand the assassination, one has to understand what was going on in the life and mind of the assassin. And once you're satisfied, as I have no doubt, that Oswald was the person who fired the fatal shots, that there was nobody with him, then what was happening to him in that period where he was separated from his wife? And it was more. It's actually it's speculation. I don't want to put the burden on Marina because this guy was capable of also being deceptive to her, so that he may simply have wanted. Yes, he wanted the love and affection, but he may well have thought he could get it by shooting the president. So I'm not prepared to say, but it's an interesting aspect of his personality.
That was an interesting aspect. It's something I had never heard when I heard that in the movie, about their personal relationship, which wasn't at that time was not very good.
And that was very much a part of what was driving him. There were multiple things that were driving him. One was the collapse of his marriage. The second one was that he was going to be out of a job in a couple of weeks, and then he hadn't had a good job record, so he had to be looking for something to do. And the third one was that he had been politically rejected by in his visit to Mexico City, and so he came back without a political future, without a job that he could count on or liked, and with a marriage that was falling apart. And all through his life, he had been someone who wanted to be a hero. He had been telling people for a long time that history would remember him. Not that he'd figured out how they were going to remember him, but that was what was driving him. And I let me say that I think the unfortunate thing is that we've been diverted in thinking about the assassination by people who want to find a conspiracy. What we really need to do is look at this particular guy, Oswald, for whom we have tremendous amounts of evidence as an example of why people go off and commit assassinations. It has relevance throughout the history of this country, and unfortunately is likely to have relevance in the future.
Yeah, I interviewed Vincent Bugliosi, I don't know, 1982 or somewhere.
Yeah.
He had the same kind of take on people like the Charles Mansons and the Oswalds and people like that. He said they're loners. We have to seek them out, find them, and learn about them. And I found out it was interesting. He was also in the movie.
Yeah.
One last thing, I read a book several years ago. First of all, for a long time, I believed the conspiracy theory that you guys got it wrong.
Okay.
And best, I mean, I was a young man. I was 13 years old when Kennedy was killed. I remember laying in bed talking to God, saying, I'll trade places with him, like 13-year-olds would. But I've been fascinated by it all my life. So I read Jim Garrison's books and several books. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that it was a load of crap, that these people are really spreading a load of crap, that Oswald actually was the man who shot him. But then I ran into a book by a ballistics expert who helped CBS with their reenaction after 10 years, of the assassination. And he was convinced that the fatal bullet was probably fired by a Secret Service agent behind the president when the president's vehicle hit the brakes, the Secret Service is returning fire, and their car hits the brakes, and he discharges the bullet. And I kind of look at that, okay, I could buy that. But what do you think?
Look at there were
it's conspiracy theory for me. Yeah.
There were two people that saw a man shooting from the 6th floor window. So there, although one of them didn't make a certain identification, he did give a description of Oswald, which, in other words, he didn't make a certain identification in the lineup, but he did give a description of Oswald that resulted in Oswald, I think, being stopped by Officer Tippett. Nextly, there were 3 empty cartridges and his gun on the 6th floor. So, and we know that the one bullet that did pierce Kennedy's neck and went forward and struck Governor Connolly, we know what that bullet was. So the likelihood that some Secret Service agent could have accidentally shot the president and that no one would have been aware of it, and then he would have pulled a gun out to do it at that point. Right, sure, anything is possible, but we got to deal with the real world. And there's no supportive evidence of that.
Yeah. Well, there's 3 cartridges in the book depository too.
Right.
Indicating
Right.
3 shots, not 2. But I've always been fascinated by that because that would make sense. I mean, it could make sense, but it still was Oswald's second bullet probably was fatal to Kennedy.
Right.
Well,
I think now we feel that it was the 3rd bullet, that the first bullet missed.
yes.
The second bullet struck Kennedy in the back and exited and hit Connolly, and the 3rd bullet hit Kennedy in the head.
Yes.
And that makes sense that there would have been, he fired his 3rd bullet and hit the president in the head and left. That makes sense.
Well, I only know is that so you get done with the investigation. The Warren Commission has all of the verbiage that you've drafted, books and books and books of. So you're all done with that. How's the letdown? How does it feel? It's all done. Now what do I do?
Oh, well, I go back to my wife and children and so forth and get on with my life. Being aware that I pitted, well, I remember my friend, this guy that I was so close to, Jim Liebler from North Dakota, with whom I didn't agree on anything politically. I remember when we both left that night that we wrapped things up, as the newspaper reporter had said, we put the thing to bed, and we were walking out of the VFW building. We said, when we're 80 years old and on crutches, somebody will want us to be on a radio program and talk about it. And here I am, older than 80, not on crutches, fortunately, and talking to you. So I knew this was going to be a part of my life, but I knew that only in this historical sense was it going to be. The rest of it, you have to go on with your life.
You do. I had to say, for somebody 80 plus years old, you seem very, very sharp and in full control of your faculties, which is a blessing.
Yes.
I'm 71. And I feel blessed to be, I'm in good condition, still play basketball, still play drums in a rock band. So I feel you took care of yourself.
Yeah, we're favored by genetics, and we're favored by a lot of things we know about health practices that our parents didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so excited when first of all, when they offered me to see the movie, they said, well, we'll send you a link so you can watch it. And I was real excited because I've always been fascinated by the case. And then when they offered me a chance to talk to you, I'm going, oh my gosh, this is like Christmas came early.
Well, I'll tell you,
it's really an honor to talk to somebody who has been a part of one of the most important events in history. And I get to ask you questions about it. I'm just...
Yeah.
How lucky.
Well, you're not alone in that. Lots of people want to do that. Let me say some things about what the documentary means to me.
I was going to ask you that, by the way.
I realized, I was fortunate enough to be able to participate in a lot of the interviews. And in fact, the idea for the documentary rose out of a relationship I had with a documentary producer who had been a law clerk for me when I was functioning as a judge and he was in law school. But I felt that the opportunity that viewers of the documentary have to see some of the principal people, and especially Ruth Paine, but to see rather than simply read their testimony, I think has to me I think it has a great effect. And I'm frankly sorry that in 1964, when we were doing all this, it really never occurred to us, I think, to videotape all the witnesses that we had.
Yeah.
I think you know, like demeanor evidence in the courtroom, if you can see who the people were that were testifying and what their facial expressions and their tones of voice were and all that kind of stuff, you can tell a lot more about whether you can trust them or not at that particular time. It's not, you can't completely trust a witness in that sense, because there are people who are quite capable of putting on a good front and deceiving you. But it's an important factor. So I felt that the documentary makes a contribution that, interestingly enough, other documentaries have not done.
No. Then you have movies like Oliver Stone's movie, which blamed everybody for the assassination of John Kennedy except for my grandmother. I mean,
Right.
It's films like that that do an injustice to the investigation. But I found your movie, the documentary, fascinating, and especially Ruth Paine you were talking about.
Yeah.
Because she was with Marina and saw that aspect of their relationship. And
Yes. And can you imagine that there's somebody making a documentary who wants to suggest that she was part of a conspiracy to assassinate the president?
that's mind-boggling.
It's outrageous.
That's mind-boggling. Yeah, and we live in, I mean, this was one of the first way out there conspiracy things that I encountered in my life, because right from the get-go, there was a lot of, it was Cuba did it, it was the Russians who did it, it was, this network of spies, and it didn't make sense to me. And the more I read about it, the less sense it made. So I always believed that the Warren Commission got it right. You got it right. The commission probably didn't do a whole lot, but.
Well, and the part, that's right. We had some very, very good people there. If we were all young lawyers, and there were people that, any law firm would have wanted to hire those people, and many of them went off to, in addition to myself, but many of them went off to be professors or judges. I wasn't the only one who went off who became a judge. So we had a very good group of lawyers working there, but we had the complete resources of the federal government and state government available to us. Anybody that we wanted to reach out to and ask to investigate, they would do it. And so that was tremendous. The area of my responsibility had to do with Jack Ruby. And as I said in the documentary, Ruby was a fascinating guy, and Ruby actually became the first conspiracy investigator, because he thought that this guy Bernard Weissman, who is also in our documentary, who had placed an anti-Kennedy ad in the Dallas Morning News that day, he thought that Weissman was part of a conspiracy to kill the president. So he set out to find, and the other thing about him was that Ruby feared that Jews would be blamed for the assassination, and he believed that because the name Weissman was on the ad, it was a fictitious name, that no one who was Jewish would possibly be involved in an effort to assassinate the president. So he believed that the ad, which bore Weissman's name, was false and the name was fictitious, and that this other group. Well, the truth of the matter with Weissman, which is another fascinating story that no one has picked up, that Weissman did exist. And although Weissman had only recently come to Dallas, Weissman put his name on the ad because he wanted the world to know that not all Jews supported Kennedy. So he was worried about anti-Semitism also.
And it seems to me I read about him somewhere in somebody's book that I read about this, about Weissman, and that Ruby want to kill him too, or try?
Well, no, Ruby wanted to find Weissman, and Ruby was a great investigator. He looked at the telephone directory and couldn't find Weissman's name. And then someone told him to look in a street directory and he couldn't find Weissman's name. So he became convinced that he was right, that Weissman didn't exist. Well, in fact, Weissman did exist, but he had only recently come to Dallas. And so Ruby thought that the post office box number that was on the Weissman ad might be somehow linked to another post office box number that was on an impeach Earl Warren billboard in Dallas. So at about 5 o'clock in the morning, right after the assassination on the 23rd, he went out to take a picture of the billboard, and then went to the post office to see if he could find someone at the post office who would tell him who took out these post office box numbers. So no, he didn't think that Weissman existed at all, but he was trying to find who put the ads up in.
And so he assassinates the assassinator.
He assassinates the assassin, and you know, to me, that story about Ruby and what you raised about Marina, and that last night conversation that he had with Marina, those are the human interest stories that are much more important than these fantasies about conspiracies. And because if someone else commits an assassination, he's likely to be somebody like Oswald, whose life is falling apart, or somebody like Ruby, who's got screwy ideas. Not completely screwy though, because there is anti-Semitism which was affecting Ruby. But it's those kind of things that we should learn from in this, not trying to find somebody who is, part of some grand conspiracy.
Well, Your Honor, I have been, the cane has been pulling me off the stage. I've been told that you have another appointment. I want to thank you, sir. It has been an honor to speak.
Well, thank you.
And
it's my privilege to talk to you, Gary.